In the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful, good evening, assalamu alaikum. As you can see, I have no notes, and that's because for the past 10 years I've been saying the same thing. I've memorized everything I have to say. And that is pretty much that over the past 14, now 15 years of the war on terror, we've seen a whole spectrum of anti-terror legislation passed in this country, the likes of which we've never even applied when Britain was being attacked by the Irish Republican Army, for example, when 10 Downing Street was hit by mortar rockets, when the MI5 building was hit by a rocket, when the Queen's cousin and the last Viceroy of India, Lord Mountbatten, was killed by the IRA, when there were bombs right across London and the rest of England, when in fact 3,000 people were killed in that conflict. We didn't have these kind of laws, though we had other terrible laws which included internment. And internment in itself, imprisonment without trial, is what caused the rise of the IRA, when especially people were killed so brutally on Bloody Sunday. So why is it that, although we're told that this threat that exists, and I accept that there is a threat, and Paris proves that there was a threat, very tangible, but we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Prevent, what is it actually doing? What's the proof that prevent is actually working? The answer is there isn't any. In fact, if you look at the statistics and the ever-growing list of people who've joined the campaign against Prevent, you'll find that there are people that are former senior police officers like Dal Babu, for example, who in 2013 said that Prevent is a toxic brand. Like the former advisor to the British government on Prevent itself, who says now, Jahan Mahmood, that Prevent is a poison chalice. David Anderson has been quoted already, the independent advisor on terrorism, who says that now Prevent is sowing the seeds of discord and mistrust amongst the Muslim community, and that it needs to be reviewed. You've got a series of people, including Keith Vaz, who's the head of the Select Committee in Parliament. You've got other MPs, you've got Muslim women groups, you've got the Council of Waltham Mosques, you've got Newham monitoring groups, and so forth, all of them. And in addition to that, a letter signed by over 360 academics and senior public figures, all of whom have come out against Prevent. But speaking out against Prevent in itself, I've learnt, and as have some of my esteemed colleagues sharing the panel, also means that you will be targeted by Prevent. It means you will be targeted by the state. It means you will be called an extremist, a fanatic, a hate preacher, and a zealot, because you call for accountability and because you ask for the evidence of Prevent and what it has achieved. Because the truth is this: the government hasn't recognized, not in the past and not in the present. Remember, Prevent was first instituted by the government of Tony Blair, who gave us Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was instituted despite having been described as a failed process, as law. You would never do this with any other process, to bring it in as law, to make it a statutory duty upon people in this country who are vested with a sacred position, teachers, lecturers, doctors, nurses, lawyers, so forth, who are required by law to inform and spy upon their clients and their students and so forth. And what does that do to that relationship? That's why people are up in arms against, not literally, because if I talk about arms here, I may get misquoted by whoever from the Daily Mail is in this audience. But nonetheless, I mean that metaphorically. People are worried. Teachers are worried. Doctors are worried. Lecturers are worried that if they don't inform, if they don't spy, that they may get reported. And because it's a crime to not report that's been untested so far in the courts, who's ready to take the first step? Who's ready to stand forward and say, I will not spy on my student who's confided in me? who I am trying to nurture for the future through the education and the relation of trust that I've built with him or her. And here you see, we've already got 14 years of anti-terror legislation where we have been the guinea pigs. You saw, first of all, in 2000, even before the war on terror began, that the Schedule 7 of the 2000 Terrorism Act finds now that people of a Muslim origin or appearance of a, whatever you want to think a Muslim looks like, are now disproportionately targeted at points of entry and exit, ports of entry and exit in this country. It's something that I've been stopped up more times than I can remember, even when I'm traveling to give evidence at a tribunal for war crimes by Bush and Blair in Malaysia, or when I'm traveling to the European Union to give evidence about Britain's involvement in complicity and in torture. And this I put to you. This is the reason why I don't need any notes anymore. Because I'm only on this platform for one reason. I was held in extrajudicial detention by the Americans with the full complicity of my government, of this government, of the British government. And what happened to me is, and many other people, is that we were detained without charge or trial, we were falsely imprisoned, we were kidnapped and tortured. All of these are crimes. The failure to investigate and prosecute those people involved in these crimes, in my view, is illegal, is wrong, unjust and immoral. And the fact that our government is still done nothing about it, i.e. the torturers, the abusers and those who are complicit in it, are still going to get away scot-free, and that somebody like me is talking about that and the causal link between the whole series, the worst of which is Guantanamo, and the most present of which is Prevent. And that's why we're being targeted. That's why the Daily Mail will run campaigns with my picture on the front, not a nice one, saying that these are preachers of hate, zealots and fanatics, given unprecedented access to our students, who are poisoning them. These people are poisoning their view of the world. Now, everybody can make their own decision, but when you're calling for truth and accountability and saying that these measures are not working, in fact, they're turning people away. They're turning people to terrorism. They're turning people to extremism. We don't want terrorists in our midst, it's true. We don't want people turning to extremism in order that they become terrorists. But who's going to determine what an extremist is? And I'll give you one example, that I've been quoted in saying that the Prime Minister is an extremist, and as a result of that, I'm an extremist. I know it's all throwing labels around everywhere, but think about this. The Prime Minister came to a school last year to talk about extremism and said the Muslim community within itself incubates extremism. And he says the failure to recognize British values and adhere to them, including the rule of law, would determine you to be an extremist. So think about this, the rule of law. My son went to that school, my young son, who's now 14 years old. But I only saw him for the first time in my life when he was 3 years old. And that's because I was detained in Guantanamo and Bagram and elsewhere, being beaten and tortured with the complicity of the British government while this child was born. And David Cameron was giving a speech about extremism in his school, not seeing the irony of the fact that he's talking about the rule of law and the failure to adhere to it, i.e. the failure to prosecute people for torture and other crimes. Where's the adherence of the rule of law? And if you thought that was bad, look at Shakir Amar and his case. 14 years without charge or trial, detained in Guantanamo, beaten, abused and tortured, again with the full complicity of the British government. That's why. You see, if I was just talking about this in and of itself, they wouldn't say he's an extremist and this is extremism. But when you link it to 14 years of abuse, of targeting a community, then you realize that you've rattled some serious quote-unquote cages. And this is where the problem lies, because calling for accountability is what we've been doing for the past 15 years, 14 years. That's what we've been asking for. we've been saying that if you are, as a government, being involved in these processes, you're targeting people. For goodness sake, in 2008, a young girl called Samina Malik was convicted for writing poetry in this great land of Shakespeare of ours. Ahmed Faraz was convicted for publishing and distributing books, some of which were written in the 12th century under terrorism. We have come from a point at which even in Britain itself, not Guantanamo, people were being detained without charge or trial for 3 years without any evidence, and then put on secretive control orders, which are akin to house arrest, in Britain again, never being able to question the evidence that allowed them to be placed under these measures. So over all of this period, we've been doing this. And I can tell you this much, that I have been welcomed, and we have been welcomed, and what we've been calling for has been welcomed mostly in the universities of this country. Year after year after year, rooms jam-packed with this, sometimes bringing over former Guantanamo guards, sometimes interrogators who kept us from seeing our children. And if you think we're extremists for inviting them in our homes, those same men who kept us from seeing our children, then I'd like to ask, when were we invited to the United States? When would Donald Trump invite us? Or George Bush invite us? Or even Obama invite us to the United States to reciprocate the measure that we did? So if this is extremism, I'm an extremist and I put my hands up. Thank you very much.